I will move on, inshallah, to the last segment of the presentation. So that's myself, your brother Nabil, Sultan. So I was asked to speak about leadership in crisis and the need for a collective community response. So I'm just going to be sharing some brief thoughts with you, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions that folks have. What I think, and a couple important points to start, is that if we're talking about leadership in a time of crisis, and we're talking about the need for a collective community response, an important issue that often gets neglected or gets confused is that people, when they think of leadership, they think of positional leadership. So they think of people in positions, CEOs or mosque board members, or imams, or what have you, or political leaders, etc. And that's, for many of us, that's our construct of leadership, positional leadership. When in fact that isn't the case, and it's really the disposition to lead that's more important than positional leadership. When the Prophet ﷺ says, "Kullukum ra'in wa kullukum mas'ulun an ra'iyatih," that all of you are shepherds and all of you are responsible for your flocks, what he's referring to, ﷺ, is that we all have a realm of responsibility that we've been given, and we all have realms of influence. And really, leadership is really about influence. As the saying goes, leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. So our ability to positively influence those around us is the degree of our leadership. So that's an important, I think, point for all of us to remember. We all exert leadership, whether it's at the level of our families or our neighborhoods or our community. And we all have that responsibility moving forward. The second important point I think in a crisis context is this idea of proactivity versus reactivity. Human beings have a tendency to react to the world around them, to the circumstances that they find themselves in, and to the emotions that arise within them. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ خُلِقَ هَلُوعًا إِذَا مَسَّهُ الشَّرُّ جَزُوعًا وَإِذَا مَسَّهُ الْخَيْرُ مَنُوعًا إِلَّا الْمُصَلِّينَ. That the human being was created in a restless, anxious state, that if evil touches him, he is impatient or fretful, and if good touches him, he is ungrateful and withholding. But that's the nature of people. But except, as Allah says, إِلَّا الْمُصَلِّينَ, except those who pray and establish a relationship with their Lord. And that is the position of a Muslim. A Muslim, a believer, is not meant to be reactive to the world around them and to the external circumstances, or their own emotions, whether they be emotions of fear, anxiety, etc. Those are all real circumstances and real emotions, but we must rise beyond them and do what is right. And proactivity is doing what is right despite the difficult circumstances that we are in. And so if we're talking about leadership in crises, really it's actually very useful and very important to look at the prophetic model. And the reason for that is because the Prophet ﷺ was not by the measure of Muslims, but by measure of Muslims and non-Muslims alike, one of the most effective and greatest leaders that the world has ever seen on any metric that you can imagine, in terms of metrics of civilizational metrics, societal metrics, social metrics. He was an effective leader. And he was unique among prophets in that he was an effective leader. And he was also unique in that he lived many, many, many crises. So when we want to learn about leadership in crisis, there is no better place to look but to the example of the Prophet. What is the prophetic model of leadership at time of crisis or outside of time of crisis? It really comes down to three aspects, three domains that the Prophet excelled in that made him who he was as a leader. The first is character, and the second is competence, and the third is commitment. So character, competence, and commitment are the three dimensions I'll leave you with that the Prophet ﷺ was particularly effective, particularly strong in, and these were the dimensions that allowed him to be the leader who he was. So when we talk about character, there are critical character attributes for leaders in crises, and the Prophet ﷺ had them, embodied them very much. The first is the idea of iman and tawakkul ala Allah, having trust and dependence on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and deriving hope from that is actually a very important part of one's character when facing a crisis, particularly a leader. The second is courage and resilience. The Prophet ﷺ demonstrated to us the importance of courage in difficult times, in times of crises. Sayyidina Ali would say that when the battle was difficult, when we were in the midst of battle and it was difficult, the companions would gravitate around the Prophet ﷺ because he was the most courageous of us all in battle. And so he demonstrated and he embodied courage in the face of difficulty, and he embodied resilience. We know how the Prophet ﷺ endured the difficult days of Mecca. He endured the boycott in Mecca. He endured very little food and was forced to place stones and tie them to his stomach out of the pain of hunger. And he was resilient through all of that. He demonstrated to the people around him that despite your circumstances, the resilience is the character of the believer. Compassion is an important character, as Sister Nikita has demonstrated to us very well in her talk, how important it is to have compassion in times of crisis, and how the Prophet ﷺ was full of compassion. Not just to believers, not just to Muslims. Actually, he was full of compassion to Muslims and non-Muslims alike in times of crisis and outside of times of crisis. And the last sort of character example I'll give is drive and decisiveness. Is a very important character traits for leading at times of crisis. And the Prophet ﷺ consistently demonstrated both decisiveness and drive. And there are many, many examples of this. One example that I always find very interesting is that, and not very well known, is that after the setback of Uhud, and when the Muslims were not victorious, certainly in that battle, and it was a big loss of more than 70 very close companions, the Prophet ﷺ picked up the army and within days set out against the disbelievers. And it just demonstrated his response to crisis. That a setback is only a failure if you allow it to be a failure. A setback can actually turn into a strength and a strategic victory. The second of the C's of leadership that I mentioned: character, competence, and commitment. Competence is very important. You may have a strong character as a leader in time of crisis, but if you don't have the competence to lead others around you, you will not be successful. And there are critical elements to competence when it comes to leadership in crisis. There are well-known or well-described leadership styles. So different leaders lead in different ways. There are democratic styles of leadership. There are sort of coaching or affiliative styles of leadership. There are pace-setting styles of leadership. There's authoritarian styles of leadership. There's different levels of leadership. And what the research in leadership shows is that there isn't one particular style that outperforms all others. But what the most effective leaders are able to do is actually shift between different leadership styles according to the context and circumstances that they're in. And so in a crisis situation, a leader that is able to shift his or her leadership style according to what the circumstances require is very important. And sometimes if you are a democratic or a coaching type leader, sometimes in a crisis, you need to become more directive, more authoritative. because that's what the circumstances require. Whether that is negotiating a deep crisis in your team or in your organization, sometimes you don't have the time in a crisis to actually get all input that you would normally like to get and seek consensus as you normally would seek. So being able to shift between leadership styles is important. And actually the Prophet ﷺ, in many examples has demonstrated his ability to shift. And he actually exercised all of these different leadership styles at different times. The one style that the Prophet had the least of is the authoritative style, but he certainly went between all styles as needed. Sort of part of the competence of effective leadership includes considering unpopular advice at a time of crisis and considering multiple options when facing a difficult circumstance, and consulting with content experts. And the Prophet ﷺ did this often. He first of all created the room for his companions to offer him counter opinions, as we know in many examples, like the example of Badr, where he was told that the place where he chose for the army to camp was not the best choice, and he was told to camp the army in a different place, and he followed that advice. Or when in the Battle of the Khandaq, of the trench, when he was told of an idea that the Arabs had never heard before of digging a trench as a defensive tactic against Quraysh, and he went with that. And so in times of crises, sometimes the solution is not easily at hand, and a leader doesn't know where the right solution will come from. And so creating an environment that allows people to place their input, and the wise leader is the one that will listen to counter opinions and find the option that is best suited. Because by definition, a crisis is a situation that is often unexpected and often out of the norm in terms of what the normal conditions would be. A couple other examples of importance of competence in leadership and in leading crises would be communication, the importance of being to be very clear in your communication with the people around you, to communicate often with people, to reassure people, to be there for people when they are having difficulty is very important. And strategy is another very important aspect of this as well, to be able to have a vision beyond the current situation that you're in, but to be able to see beyond that and see where things are heading to, and respond not just for the short term, but also for the medium and long terms. These are all important aspects of the competence of leadership. So again, you can have the character of a good character, strong character for leadership, but you also need competence. And finally, in addition to character and competence, you need commitment. And commitment means that you are there for people, that people understand that you are committed to them, that you care for them, that you are committed to the vision of the group and the team. And the Prophet ﷺ demonstrated very, very high commitment at all times in his life, again, to both believers and non-believers, actually, in his life. And to be there with your people is actually a very important concept. When Sayyidina Musa went forth ahead of his people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to him, وَمَا أَعْجَلَكَ عَنْ قَوْمِكَ يَا مُوسَى? What allowed you to speed forward in front of your people, leaving your people? And so it's a reminder that the leader should be with his people, or her people, should care about them and should be committed to them. As the saying goes, people don't care what you know until they know that you care. And it's very important for people that are being led by others in any capacity, that they feel that the people that are leading them actually have their best interests at heart and care for them and are committed to their success and their well-being. So this is just a sort of a brief overview of some ideas about leadership in crisis, and how important it is in this time of crisis for us to look to the Prophet ﷺ and to look to his model of leadership because there is much to be learned. Jazakumullah khair.